Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start off with a quote. This was taken from PC World's list of the top 10 worst video games of all time. On this list you can find the likes of Shaq Fu, Daikatana, the original Atari version of Pac-Man, but taking the number 9 entry is Prince of Persia Warrior Within. The list states the following. In an effort to increase the next game's appeal, Ubisoft opted for a tried and true formula and ramped up the violence, sex and noise. The newer, edgier Prince was aggressive and obnoxious, the level of gore was increased, female characters were eroticized and wore less, and the soundtrack, originally based on Persian music, was largely replaced with heavy rock. In short, Prince of Persia went extreme. As one friend put it, Warrior Within took everything that Sands of Time did right and threw it out the window. This is one of the most infuriating examples of hate towards a game that deserves so much praise that I'm actually shocked that there are people who are either unable or unwilling to see why this game kicks ass up and down the field. Yet I'm getting the impression that this video is about to go down like a concrete slab, but I just want to state that I'm about to praise a game that seems to be universally panned by everyone and their dog. Except for all of you who said you liked it in my last video, to which my response follows. Buddy! Yeah! I thought I was the only one! Prince of Persia originally started out in 1989 with that all-loved but unforgiving as balls game. Then there was some sequel or whatever, and then the franchise died. And then it came back to life again in 1999 as Prince of Persia 3D. And then the franchise died again. But then, in 2003, we saw the franchise come back to life once more in order to get one up over Jesus, as we saw the second reboot into the series known as Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. The general attitude towards this game is pretty much the same anywhere you go. Ask anyone you like who has played this game, and they'll rate it as one of the best games ever made. Now, before I talk about Warrior Within, I've got to talk about Sands of Time first. The actual gameplay has two main features to it: combat and puzzles. The combat was pretty impressive, at least when it first came out. It felt very smooth and fluid and was very easy to pick up. You could do light attacks, heavy attacks, you could block, you could do all these acrobatic moves too, such as vaulting over your enemy and slashing them whilst you're in midair. However, I didn't like the finisher moves. When you defeat an enemy, they'll get knocked down, but if you don't do anything about it, then they'll eventually get back up. So in order to put them down for good, you need to stab them whilst they're down with the Dagger of Time, and that will kill them for good. But whilst you're in the middle of this finisher move, you're completely vulnerable to other attacks, and it can get quite annoying when all you're trying to do is finish off an enemy, but you keep getting shafted up the butt each time because an enemy got the jump on you. In which case you'll be faced with the option of either finishing off an enemy whilst losing health, or keeping your health, but having to defeat that previous enemy all over again, and it can get a bit repetitive. It's not a bad feature, but I honestly felt that it could have been done better. The puzzles, on the other hand, are practically flawless. They are so well thought out and so brilliantly placed. All of the puzzles aren't tough as such, they're more clever than anything, and will require you to pull off a mixture of acrobatic techniques and time manipulation powers in order to progress past them. This game is very good at getting you to think puzzles through in ways you'd never thought of before, as time manipulation was still a subject that most games didn't go near back then, but Sands of Time pulled it off very well. However, one of the most praised aspects about this game has to be its atmosphere. It's set in a medieval Arabian city, and as such, your surroundings are beautiful, though a tad cartoony, but whatever, I don't give a f***. It kind of adds this bittersweet feel to the game, in that, despite the fact that you're on a perilous quest that could cost you your life and end the world, you're constantly surrounded by abstract beauty, and it's strange and sometimes harrowing. It's like everything around you becomes more beautiful before imminent death, and if that was intentional, then this game is quite morbid, but it's hard not to be impressed with the setting. It has this charm to it, this aura of fantasy that makes you feel like a kid in awe. It kind of feels like being a 7-year-old in Disneyland during the Reaper invasion. The story progresses well and ended on a good note, though the endgame boss fight was shit, but I was happy with how the story ended. It ended the best way that it could have ended, and left you considering if anyone should ever have the power to control time. Then, 1 year later, Warrior Within came out, and acted as a direct sequel to Sands of Time, and I swear, everyone f***ing hated this game. When Warrior Within was released, it somehow managed to win a dick slap from everyone who played it, and it was seen as both a terrible sequel and a terrible game, at least from a lot of people in the game community, not so much from reviews. I have had just about enough of people punching this game in the gut and calling it a bad sequel. This game is really f***ing good and you just don't even know it. In fact, I'd go as far as saying that Warrior Within surpasses the previous game in more ways than one. That's right, Warrior Within is the better game. According to True Review. Notice opinions, ladies and gentlemen. Warrior Within takes place 7 years later. The basic premise is that because you unleashed the sands of time in the last game, you are now fated to die, and an immortal beast known as the Dahaka is after you and will kill you in order to fulfill your destiny. However, learning of this, the prince puts forward a plan to save his ass by going to where the sands were created, travelling back in time and stopping them being made, thus erasing the events of the first game. But the beast has followed him there, and now it's a race against his own demise to try to change his fate. That's the setting, now on to the main presentation! The gameplay once again is divided into two sections, combat and puzzles. The combat in this one has been massively improved upon in several ways. More attack moves were implemented, as were more finishing moves. They also got rid of the Dagger of Time finisher move, which I was quite happy to see the back of personally, because now the combat felt like it had been turned up to a faster pace, instead of me knocking down an enemy and then going, alright, hold up, okay, everyone, just stay where you are. Now I'm going to finish this guy off, and I want all of you to... Hey, dude in the blue armor! Listen to me for a second. I don't want anyone to attack me from behind. Okay? Now combat felt much more fluid, and it helped that I didn't have to worry if I hadn't finished off an enemy. In fact, speaking of finishing moves, this game added in a different method of finishing off enemies. Being entirely optional, when an enemy turned to a brownish-greyish colour, you could perform one of several finishing moves on them. It doesn't serve much of a purpose other than killing the enemy, but it makes combats much more enjoyable to watch. You could vault over the enemy like before, but when you slash at them, they'd literally split in half and die. You can throw your enemy as well, and you can even use the environment during combat even more this time round too. Along the way you'll get new and more powerful swords like in the previous game, but now you can pick up enemies' weapons too and use that in combat. Or you can throw it at the enemy and make them fall over. There's so much more added in here that the first one didn't have, and that's not a criticism of Sands of Time, because it didn't know any better, but this is definitely praise to Warrior Within. Also, the boss battles are just so massively awesome in this game compared to Sands of Time. Sands of Time had two boss battles in it. One against your father, and one against the Vizier at the end, and both were very disappointing. But Warrior Within had loads of boss fights, and they just felt so damn satisfying. Almost every fight was this fucking intense showdown. This head-to-head that had been building up for a while, and you knew it was coming, but holy shit, it's happening right now. This game even added in mini-bosses in the form of golems, which were a surprise to fight the first time, and the way that you finished them off was both entertaining and painful to watch. The puzzles themselves too are tweaked, though for the most part it's pretty much the same as Sands. Because Ubisoft knew that most people who would play Warrior Within were people who had played Sands of Time, the puzzles were made to be a little bit harder in order to offer some challenge to the player outside of what we'd be expecting. There are several sections where you get chased by the Dahaka, and each of these sections were these fucking intense run-for-your-life moments because death was right behind you in the literal sense. There were timed puzzles in Sands, but if you failed to get there in time, then you'd just have to walk back to the start and do it again. And while some of these puzzles still existed in Warrior Within, in some cases, if you failed the time puzzle, then you're dead. End of. The puzzles themselves were made to be more hazardous by adding in more traps and falls and such, and sometimes they felt like they were designed purely to kill the player rather than to deter intruders. Oh, and while we're on the subject of puzzles, what the fuck was the deal with that bathhouse puzzle in Sands of Time? No, seriously, I want to know. You walk into a room with 9 doors. You pick a door at random, and then you get teleported back to the entrance. So after checking several doors, you realise that one of them will not teleport you back, and will instead throw you up at another door. At this point you realise that to get through here, you must go through a certain number of doors in a certain order, meaning that this is just a glorified code puzzle. And guess how you solve the code? Trial and fucking error, ladies and gentlemen, trial and fucking error. And even when you think you finished the code, you just go to the next floor and do it again. Hang on.
Alright, this is getting ridiculous.
Is this really a good example of a video game puzzle? Do people think this was fun? You figure out the puzzle the moment you don't get teleported back to the start, meaning that everything else is just paperwork. It's a fucking clerical task. The second you figure out a puzzle is the second it stops being a puzzle. If you figure out a puzzle but aren't able to finish it straight away, then we either have an idiot on our hands, or the game is just wasting your time, and this puzzle is wasting mine. And you know that I'm right! Just fucking look at the staircase you have to walk down to get to this puzzle! It goes on forever! Like, what does this add to the game? Sure, Warrior Within makes you go down narrow corridors, but at least it has the decency to try and kill me in the process with traps and dudes, so that I'm actually doing something fun, and not just going from point A and reaching point B in January 2036. Warrior Within's puzzles were better is what I'm trying to say. Also, optional challenges were added in as well. In the previous game, there'd be cracks in the wall which would lead you to an empty corridor, made you march down it and drink an unknown substance from a strange well in order to gain more health. I'm pretty sure that whole section never gets explained. However, Warrior Within made you work for your health upgrades. Finding the start of these challenges was usually a challenge in itself, and required you to massively go out of your way to find them. Once you did, you'd then be required to run a gauntlet of traps that were considerably harder in difficulty than the puzzles that you'd face throughout the rest of the game. When you came across one of these in Sands of Time, you're all like, oh, okay, I found another health upgrade. In Warrior Within, you're all like, fucking sweet, dude, I found another health upgrade! It made you feel like you achieved something, and not just stumbled across something. Simply finding the entrance to a health upgrade challenge was a victory in itself, and when you had completed the challenge, you'd stop and appreciate the small amount of extra health you had gained because you invested a lot of energy into getting it. Warrior Within was also slightly less linear than Sands of Time was. Again, this definitely isn't criticism of Sands. Sands of Time was very linear and got you constantly going forwards, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Warrior Within kind of threw in this open world. See, as the plot continues, several new places on the islands will open up to you, but you may also be tasked with returning to places you've already been to. Now, on the surface, this sounds like backtracking, which is a gaming sin, but fortunately, the backtracking in this game is forgivable because shit's going on along the way, thus constantly keeping you entertained, and with parts of the scenery around you changing, it makes it all feel new. I also felt that the plot was much better this time around as well. Now, I realise that I'm a sucker for stories involving time travel, but I thought that the plot twists and the general direction of the story was much more interesting this time around. The ending sucked in comparison to Sands of Time, with one of the most awkward and unnecessary sex scenes right at the end, where both parties took a leaf out of Right to Hell's book by remaining fully clothed, and it ended on a really vague cliffhanger, but I thought that the way that the plot showed itself was incredible. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't played it yet, but the plot basically plays out twice. Once when you're in the present, and then once more when you go back in time and see it again. Several things happen the first time round that will sort of confuse you, but it's only when you see it from your future perspective the second time round that everything starts to make sense, and you're all like, ah, no way! So that's what that was all about. Whether you like the storytelling here or not isn't really the issue, but you have to appreciate the effort and thinking that went into trying to make the plot really interesting. There weren't any major plot developments in Sands of Time, and any dramatic twists were kind of tame. You find out that the prince's father is a sand monster in one scene, and then you kill him in the same scene. And Pharaoh fucking off near the end was not a dramatic twist. You go from hand-holding a weak character to not hand-holding a weak character. I'd call that a win, to be honest. Yeah, have we all forgotten that most of Sands of Time was essentially an escort mission? In puzzles, Pharaoh was very handy, and I liked how she added into the mix there. But in combat, she was a real fucking pain. She was the human equivalent of a Ming vase. Expensive and all tarted up nicely, but will break the second you shake her fist at it. And why the fuck would you bring a Ming vase into battle? Why did she need to get involved in battles in the first place? Couldn't she just crawl through a crack or something? Yes, that was a quote from Sands of Time. I don't want to give you the impression that I dislike Sands of Time, because I really do love that game too, but in hindsight, there were a few things that pissed me off with it. Okay, what about the atmosphere and the feel of the game? Do you know what? This is where most of the criticism comes from surrounding Warrior Within. Most would agree that Sands of Time was incredibly edibly charming, and I would agree with that. Most would also agree, however, that Warrior Within is almost completely devoid of charm. And you know what? I'd agree with that also. However, most people seem to be under the impression that a lack of charm instantly makes for a bad game. You wouldn't call Silent Hill 2 a charming game now, would you? People seem to claim that the fact that the charm from the first game is nowhere present in Warrior Within is an insult to Sands, and I couldn't disagree with this more, because the atmosphere of this game reflects the premise. The plot here is centered around the prince's death. Death is a big part of this game, and it hangs over you the entire time. To then take this story and add in Sands of Time's atmosphere would just feel out of place and inappropriate. Sands of Time got away with it because you were climbing towers in the sky and walking through beautiful gardens and palaces. Warrior Within's setting has a more of an industrial look to it, like the whole island is one big machine, and so the dark and oppressive atmosphere here goes hand in hand with the feel of the plot. But looking at what most people say is wrong with Warrior Within, you begin to see a pattern forming. People don't like Warrior Within because it's not Sands of Time. That tells us that what these people really want is an exact clone of what they already have, something of which Ubisoft has taken great notice of when it comes to the Assassin's Creed series. I don't know how any of you watching this at home feel right now, but personally, if I play a fantastic game and then hear that there's a sequel coming out, I always pray that it turns out to be completely different from the previous game. Right now, I am fucking buzzing about Persona 5 coming out, but I really hope that it's nothing like number 4, because if I wanted to play a game like Persona 4, then I'd just go and play Persona 4. Sequels that showcase everything that its prequel had and nothing else have always been considered complete flops, yet gamers still ask for them. Just fucking look at what happened to BioShock. 1 was awesome, and pretty much everyone demanded for a sequel that was very similar to the first game. That was what we asked for, and that was what we got. BioShock 2 is BioShock 1. But what pisses me off about this case is that the second BioShock 2 came out, we all saw it for what it was. An unnecessary clone of the original that was never going to be as good. But that's what we got, and all those people who were crying out for a BioShock clone were among the first to criticise the game for being a BioShock clone. BioShock Infinite, however, is an example of a fantastic sequel, as it used the formula of the first game, but decided to brave new territory. Warrior Within, however, got slammed in many forums for not being Sands of Time. I genuinely believe that had Warrior Within been made to be a Sands of Time clone, then it would have been seen as one of the worst examples of a video game sequel. In conclusion, I loved the entirety of the Sands of Time trilogy, but I felt that Warrior Within was the better game, but that's just me. I thought that the game that came after this trilogy was shit, and Forgotten Sands might as well have been called Sands of Time HD. It's awesome to see that there are other people out there that still love this game too, and I would high-five you, but there's a computer screen in the way and I'm not actually talking to you right now. I'm speaking to my microphone but making it sound like I'm talking to you. Full breaking moment, I know. But anyway, this matter is finished and this video turned out to be much longer than I thought, so I'm out of here. See ya.
Sometimes I think this life is killing me. Sometimes I think this life is killing me.